Investigations on the disturbances at St. Albans and elsewhere in South Africa during the Christmas period.
Yes, thanks very much for having me in your program, Mr. Mateza, and good afternoon to your viewers. St. Albans, on the 26th of December, erupted in one unit there, the B unit where we have maximum offenders, during the morning unlock and breakfast. And in that outbreak, the officials got injured and 3 offenders have died ever since. The department is about to conclude that investigation, and I'm definite that by next week I will have a report so that I can then go back and implement some of the recommendations that we'll be getting from that side. Indeed, you're quite correct that St. Albans has become synonymous with prison violence. But it was not only at St. Albans that we experienced that. Even at Recourse Correctional Facility, there was an incident there where offenders set a cell alight. But also at Krugersdorp. So these incidents take place from time to time. But St. Albans and Paulsmoor and Brandflay had been those facilities that forever give us problems. Largely because of the gangs that are there, but also I think the attitude of both offenders and officials that needs to be attended to, that we need to change. Remember, we are now a correctional services, we are not a prison system. There are some of offenders that are still locked up as prisoners, and there are some officials that are still operating as prison warders. And for us to get that transformation, change of mindset, is what I need to work on, especially at these facilities where we have these outbreaks.
As you pointed out, in 2013 there were similar disturbances at this very facility, and it would seem to me that this time around the same issues that led to those disturbances are still prevalent. In 2013 and in 2014 there were disturbances at St. Albans. The first one was as a result of offenders themselves, 2 gangs fighting. And then in 2014 again it was also our officials and offenders. And now last year, just after Christmas, it was also again gang-related attack on officials. And this time around, funny enough, the 26, 27, 28 gangs ganged together and attacked officials, which is for us something that is very abnormal, and it has never happened. And that's why we need to definitely look into it and try and stop it. Let's talk to somebody who's been there. Mr. Goldenals Gudu, what leads to these organized crime? What leads to organized crime in our facilities?
Well, before I even go there, my brother, I want to once again send our heartfelt and sincere deepest condolences to the family of the bereaved, and also wish a speedy recovery of the injuries that was inflicted both to inmates and correctional officers alike. Gangsterism, lawlessness, and unruly behavior thrive in the absence of the rights of both correctional officers and inmates alike. You see, I am armed here with one of the most dangerous weapons in the history of the country and the Department of Corrections. That is Act 1 of 8 of 1996, Section 35, subsection 2, paragraph E, which reads as follows. Each and every detained person, including sentenced offenders, do have a right to conditions of detention that are consistent to human dignity, including at least exercise at the provision and at the state expense for adequate accommodation. That makes some inmates to start to revolt. Adequate nutrition, adequate exercise, and adequate reading material. Now, when you go around, inmates has given up hope because the organization that is supposed to represent them has been silenced. So they are now there and they take issues in their own hands. I would, in the contrary, say it's because of the absence of the rights of these offenders that has come to terms that their rights are entrenched in the Constitution, and they decide now to do things for themselves, and unfortunately it becomes violence against correctional officers, violence against themselves and violence against the system. And until such time, we go to a direction where we were told on the 25th of June, 1998, when President Mandela officially opened and launched a project for retraining and human rights for the Department of Correctional Services in Kroonstad, where he says the way that a community treats its prisoners, it's one of its sharpest reflections of the character of that society.
Now, you've mentioned a couple of things. Let me go down to Mr. Raga, Mr. National Manager for Legal Services, the Judicial Correctional Inspectorate. Mr. Raga, first of all, if you can give us the role of the Judicial Correctional Inspectorate, and then we can come to some of the issues Mr. Golden Miles Budu raised here.
Thank you, Mr. Mateza. Good afternoon, National Commissioner and Mr. Budu. Yes, the Judicial Inspectorate for Correctional Services is a creature of statute. Its essential role is to monitor the treatment and conditions of inmates around our country. That includes, of course, sentenced offenders and remand detainees. So in essence, we form part of the many organs of state that oversee, in this sense, correctional services, and that inmates are kept in line with the law as set out in the Constitution and the Correctional Services Act.
The one question that concerns me, National Commissioner, is almost 23 years into our democracy, we are still confronted with a system that is as violent as in the dark days of apartheid, despite progressive legislation like the Correctional Services Act and the Constitution.
Mr. Mateza and your viewers, I think we should be very clear. The Department of Correctional Services has transformed from a prison system to a correctional system, whose mandate and purpose is based on the Constitution of the Republic. Now, for that transformation to take place and become our day-to-day work, a change of mindset has to come in, not only on correctional officials but also on offenders. Because what is crucial is once you are in a correctional facility, either as a remandee or as a sentenced person, you need to develop what we call insight into your offending behavior. Now, that change and that mindset has to come into offenders as well. Now, Mr. Budu is raising a question of that gangs are thriving in correctional facilities, which I think is incorrect. If you look into our communities where we come from, be it in the Western Cape, Khayelitsha, be it in Bloemfontein, be it anywhere, there are gangs that are operating in communities. Now, this gangsterism is not only a correctional services issue. It's an issue that we as South Africans need to come together and address it amongst our communities. We are doing our best in a correctional setting, but because of the fact that a correctional service is a microcosm of the bigger picture of South Africans, a holistic picture of this country, we then have to, whatever happens in the community will also happen in our facilities, like gangsterism. Like corruption is happening in our facilities.
National Commissioner, my apology. I just want to come. Somebody, a researcher in this field, Lucas Manting,
yes,
from Open Society, actually supports what Mr. Budu is saying. He says the capacity to effect positive change in incarcerated subjects and in the community from which they come from, yes, is contradicted by their tendency, that is correctional facilities, by their tendencies to produce more criminality, and that they inhibit earning the nickname universities of crime.
I think Lucas is a researcher, and his research was based on interviews that he had with offenders, qualitative interviews, so talking to an offender, talking to an official. What I think lacks in that research was to go into our communities, in our townships, in our towns, where we stay, and go and establish as to whether there are no gangs there. That's for me important. Otherwise, when we say correctional facilities are universities of gangsterism and crime, I think we are missing the point. We are missing the point completely, because the people that are in our facilities come from communities. They committed crime in the communities. So we are not dealing here with school children. We are dealing here with hardened criminals, people that have killed, people that have raped, people that have robbed. So we are not dealing here with school kids. The fact is, yes, there is gangsterism in our facilities. We cannot deny that. But what is important is we need to also go and address it in our communities. I think that's important.
Well, gentlemen, we'll continue with this discussion. If you'd like to join us in today's discussion, you can call us on 011-714-5497 or 5498. Alternatively, you can tweet us at Rights and Recourse or send us an email at rightsandrecourse@sabc.co.za. When we come back, we'll glean on corruption and maladministration, but we will visit some of the issues raised here today. Stay with us.
The world has become digital, and we need to find new ways to solve current problems.
You're capturing your geo coordinates. So if you stay in a shack, you still have an address because we know where you are.
Some are using it to tell new African narratives.
Our first priority is catering to our fans. And we have to go where they are, and they're online.
That's Network with Ms. Phumelele Zondi every Sunday at 7:30 p.m. Central African Time.
Welcome back as we discuss the state of our correctional facilities in South Africa. Let me go down to Cape Town to Mr. Raga. Mr. Raga, one of the issues that was raised here was the abuse of human rights of prisoners. What role does the Judicial Inspectorate play?
Yes, Mr. Mateza. I'm not too sure if I heard the last part of your question.
The last part is what role
I will answer the question.
What role does the Judicial Correctional Inspectorate play in seeing to it that prisoners are treated or inmates are treated fairly,
Yes.
with dignity and with human rights intact?
Yes. Mr. Mateza, with your permission, perhaps I can just address one or two aspects that was raised earlier by the Commissioner and Mr. Bodo. It's correct that in the festive period, in November, December, that the St. Albans had erupted, Krugersdorp before that. There were also incidents at Johannesburg, Medium A, Thohoyandou,
Yes.
and a number of other prisons. In fact, that was also preceded sometime in September at Modabi. Now, all of those prisons had elements of dissatisfaction amongst inmates. Some of them had elements of the root cause of the violence or the commencement of the violence being by gangsters. And what I want to address is this question of gangs and the phenomenon of gangs and gangsters. I think it's common cause that our prisons, many of them have gangs. They're fairly structured. Those gangs come from the community. I think where we need to locate the debate is whether the solutions that the Department of Correctional Services has implemented are actually working. In this sense, I talk very briefly to whether the level of intelligence, inside information, whistleblowing, and all the rest, whether those elements exist to root out, well, we may not root out gangsterism, but to at least have it contained where these kind of incidents don't occur. Now, turning to the question of the inspectorate's role, The inspectorate investigates each and every matter independently of the Department of Correctional Services. We have within our prisons persons called independent correctional center visitors, who are basically our eyes and ears, who record and monitor what's going on in the prisons and do preliminary investigations. For example, in the St. Albans matter, we commenced our own thorough investigation from the 26th of December, just after the incident occurred. And as late as yesterday, I received a report from one of our independent visitors who interviewed an inmate in a provincial hospital. We won't go into the merits or demerits, or it's premature at this stage to go into the merits or demerits as to whether unlawful force was used, whether officials had been the direct cause or indirect cause of the deaths of the inmates. But I think suffice to say, at a prima facie level, at St. Albans and at some of the other institutions, the inspectorate is critical of the type of retribution that officials employ whenever there's an attack from inmates.
Let's hold it there. Mr. Raga, let's hold it there for a while. Let's take this call from Raymond in Northwest. Raymond, good afternoon and welcome to Rights and Recourse.
Good afternoon. How are you, sir?
Fine, thanks. How are you, Raymond?
Very well, and I would like to participate in the discussion
Go ahead.
2 fronts. Firstly, what the Commissioner is saying with regards to the gangs and their relationship to the townships and the towns where we come from. I would want to argue straight ahead that is irrelevant. It is irrelevant in the sense that, yes, it is a fact that there are gangsters operating in townships, and there are gangsters that operate in prisons or in correctional facilities, rather. However, the ethos and the modus operandi of these gangs are totally different. In the correctional services system, you find the numbers gangs, which operate totally on a separate policy and ethos and systems, as opposed to those gangs that operate in the townships. And it does not necessarily translate into the same thing when a gangster from outside comes into the correctional service and becomes a member of the gangster in a certain gangster or the number of gangsters in the prison. It does not do that. So his point with regard to the qualitative research that has been done in terms of interviewing inmates and interviewing officials and arguing that it falls short of dealing with the issue of gangs in the township is, for me, totally irrelevant. What my assertion is that the correctional services and the department is still trapped in the prison systems and not dealing with what we now call correctional systems. Officials also are identifying with this number of gangs, and I'm talking from an informed particular position insofar as this particular matter is concerned. And Miles is correct with regards to the inefficiencies and the taking away of the basic rights, or rather privileges, of those that are incarcerated, relating to issues around overcrowding of these facilities, around issues of facilities such as sporting facilities, privileges relating to exercise, access to television, health, reading material, and so on and so forth. These are very limited in prisons and in correctional services. And in fact, officials want to use those as leverage against what you call inmates, to say, if you don't do this, we will then strip you of this particular privilege, as if some of those privileges, particularly health and sport, as if they are not necessarily right, but they are privileges, and that as a person who is incarcerated, you are stripped off of all your rights as a human being in terms of the Constitution of the Republic. That is my take insofar as the debate is concerned.
Thank you, Raymond. What Raymond is saying there, Commissioner, I would like Mr. Budi to come in first and then the Commissioner, but what is he saying there? I glanced at a report that said DCS was demilitarized in 1996 with no replacement management structure, which led to the collapse of order and discipline, and there was a concern that the correctional services would become ungovernable. In other words, the demilitarization was moved just in word. But the people are still demilitarized. They were not taught management systems. And this is what is lacking within correctional services. The people who are running the correctional services, in other words, are not management trained. They don't know. In other words, they should have, for instance, correct me if I'm wrong, they should have all these sophisticated things that are done by your social services department. They should understand those things, because you're dealing with people who have committed crimes who come from outside this place. Another one that Raymond raised was the fact that it is a misnomer that gangsterism comes from outside into the prisons. There's a very well documented book by Johnny Steinberg that the number, which talks about how gangs were started in jail. It's not as the commissioner puts it. Mr. Budu, and then the commissioner.
Mr. Mateza, and your viewers and fellow South Africans, I haven't come here and I don't want to argue with the commissioner. I don't want to argue.
No, we're going to argue. I'll stand between the two of you.
I've been arguing since time immemorial, and it doesn't help. When you argue with facts and you speak truth to power, justice, and authority, then you are seen as being arrogant and confrontational. I came here because I've been around the block many, many times, and Mr. Modise is a seasoned correctional officer. He knows exactly what is going in there. He knows exactly what needs to be done. And he knows for the fact that the Department of Correctional Services can't do it all by themselves. They need organizations like us. But why they have shot us as an organization that has been around for so many times, only the hell knows alone. But that's not what I wanted to say. What I wanted to say is, if the Department of Correctional Services want to get out of this quagmire, and this situation where they are embarrassed time and again, they need just to take the Constitution. They need to look into what President Nelson Mandela said on the 25th of June 1998, may his soul rest in peace. And I think what he sees happening now in our prisons, he might be spinning in his grave. They must also go...
What did he say?
What he says here is, in the prisons of apartheid, the inhumanity of that system was starkly evident. Perhaps that can only be fully appreciated by those who had been incarcerated as black persons under the apartheid regime. And in conclusion, he says, but all of us do know that it was a prison system with no room of human rights, one designed to rob each prisoner of his human dignity, and which thereby in the end also take away the human dignity of prison authorities and personnel alike, quote unquote.
Let's give the commissioner some time to respond.
No, thanks, Mr. Mateza and your viewers. I think we need to put some facts correct here. Indeed, the department demilitarized in 1996. But to say that there was no management that was put in place to be able to manage the department effectively, that is not true. The managers that we have in the department, in our national head office, in our regions, are managers that have qualified themselves in terms of management. And when we appoint people, Mr. Mateza, there are particular competencies that we are looking for. The fact is, yes, there might be some of our managers that still need further training, but we look for particular competencies that would enable this person to function effectively in his job. Now, we have the understanding in correctional services that the transformation that we had undertaken then, and even up until now, is not a 1 day, 1 year, 2 year, 10 year commitment. It's going to be a commitment that is going to go on and on and on. Our country right now compares favorably with other countries in the continent, including other countries in the BRICS. We have visited Brazil. We have recently seen what happened in Brazil. We compare favorably with correctional system of Brazil. Indeed, the fact is...
National Commissioner, my apologies. So do you mean there's riots there, so there should be riots here?
No, I mean our system. I'm not talking about riots, I'm talking about system. And indeed, yes, I'm the first person to admit that there's still quite a lot of room for improvement. But to say that the management that is there currently is unable to manage, that is not...
No, what we are saying, I think what is being said is the management principles that they are being taught are not the right management principles.
No, I don't know where Mr. Muntir gets that. Maybe he must come and educate us. But also, what I want to state here.
Let's take this call from Lester in Cape Town, and then you can give us what you understand. Lester, good afternoon, and welcome to Rights and Recourse. Hello, Lester, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Yes,
hello.
Lester.
Hi. Thank you for taking my call. A few years ago, there was a review of the criminal justice system led by then Deputy Minister Johnny de Lange, and the organization that I belong to, a civic body, focused on 3 issues when we contributed to this review, which was monitoring of inmates, overcrowding, and substance abuse. Now, first of all, monitoring, we emphasize CCTV cameras, but also electronic tags for all inmates. I'd like to know what your panel has to say about that, but also on overcrowding. Overcrowding and substance abuse recommendations actually overlap there, where we, for example, raise issues of child safety concerns of children being in prisons, and we believe that they should rather be in child safety institutions where their behavior could be monitored and possibly even corrected. Substance abuse obviously needs to be clamped down, but Dr. Evie Rapiti is a medical doctor with a postgrad degree in mental health, runs a rehab program and also provides counseling at Paulsmoor and other prisons. Recommended in engagements we had with him a lock-up rehabilitation facilities for those caught with prohibited drugs, as many languish in prison due to being caught with prohibited substances and the addictions are not being addressed. And I'd like to know what your panel thinks about that, instead of having these people just thrown in prison, where we find a lot of these prisons actually are filled with guys who've been caught with substances. They should rather be redirected to the rehabilitation facility. Thank you. I'll listen.
Thank you, Lester. Thank you, Lester. I will first give the Commissioner, because he was still on the floor. Then I'd like Mr. Raga down in Cape Town to respond to that question too. Mr. Commissioner.
Thanks, Dumile. I think if you make a study of gangsterism, it is going to be critically important to establish in our country where it originated from. Those of us who have been around for some time will tell you that gangs originated outside and impacted in our prison system, primarily at our mines, importantly at Velkom, where you had your Sotho-speaking citizens and also your Xhosa-speaking citizens. And then they gang together to say the Sothos against the others. And that manifested itself also in our prison system. And I need to state this fact as well. Yes, indeed, there are gangs in our facilities. There are number gangs in the Western Cape, in the Eastern Cape. But when you come into Gauteng, you find the number gangs, but also other gangs, like your Air Force and your Big Fives and so forth. Now, it is important that in gathering information, intelligence information, we work together with other crime-fighting agencies like your security department, state security, the police, but also to have our own intelligence capacity. That's where I think we are.
And that's why you have the Big Five.
That's no.
I'm told the Big Five are guys who give your guys information.
They used to do that, but not anymore. But they will do that also with an objective in mind. But what I think Lester is saying is quite correct, that we don't work alone. In the criminal justice system, it is ourselves, the police, justice, and the prosecuting authority. And the challenges that we are facing as that criminal justice system are challenges that we lock up in South Africa. We believe in locking up people. That's number one. Number two, we take forever to finish cases. Now that also again impacts on our accommodation. we find that we have people that are awaiting trial for periods longer than 2 years, longer than 4 years,
should not be the case.
longer by 6 years, which should not be the case. And
Just hold that thought, National Commissioner, because I want to come back to Mr. Raga. But for now, if you'd like to join us in today's discussion, please call us on 011 714 5497 or 5498, or tweet us at Rise Recourse, or send us an email and tell us whether we should cover more of these kind of discussions around correctional facilities. Stay with us.
The proceedings of the Fees Commission has once again been disrupted.
We as a university do not feel that fee-free higher education currently is feasible.
This is a Mickey Mouse commission. During in the commission, student grievances we're not a part of the commission in the program. So that is why we tend to disturb the program.
If you tell me that I can't leave, then you are keeping me hostage.
Some students demanded that UCT lift the suspensions and expulsions of certain students.
Welcome back to Rights and Recourse as we are discussing the state of our correctional facilities. But first of all, before we go to Mr. Raga, let's take this call from Pindile from the Eastern Cape. Pindile, good afternoon and welcome to Rights and Recourse. Hello, Pindile, are you there?
Yes, Mr. Mateza.
Yes, sir.
Good afternoon.
Yes, Pindile.
Good afternoon to your visitors there, the Commissioner and Mr. Miles Bidi. What I'd like to, if I may, suggest about the...
If you can raise your voice a little.
Sorry?
If you can raise your voice a bit.
Yes, for the viewer's sake, my name is Pindile Zweli, and I'm from the South African Sentence and Awaiting Trial Prisoners Organization, which is SABC, based here in the Eastern Cape.
You go ahead, give us your contribution to the discussion.
Okay, thank you. What I would like to suggest in this St. Albans saga to the Commissioner, if I may, is that because of the violence, the occurrence violence, or the continuous violence that occurs in or at St. Albans, I've spoken to many officials, including some inmates who called us with regards to the violence there. And the suggestion was this, that the entire complement of the officials, including the head, to be temporarily deployed elsewhere, like in Tata or Middlegrove, for an example, including the inmates, especially the maximum inmates, because as we have heard that there is corruption on both sides. At this stage, we cannot point fingers. We must implement something, and this is to separate or take the whole complement from St. Albans and temporarily place them at another correctional services or center. I know this is going to be a problem for some officials, including for some inmates, but to avoid further conflicts between these two parties, I think that is one of the things that we can suggest and do, if possible.
Thank you very much.
My view, Mr. Mateza,
Pindile, thank you very much. We will follow up on that, whether it is feasible. The National Commissioner will respond to that. But I want to go back to Mr. Raga. Mr. Raga, one of the things that many people are talking about, the civil society organizations are talking about the fact that the Judicial Inspectorate of Correctional Facilities it doesn't have the same powers as, for instance, IPERT. And in the Jolly Commission recommended that the inspectorate must have those teeth of the public protector and IPERT. I don't know whether you heard me.
Yes, I think I got the gist of your question, Mr. Mateza. It is true that there's been a debate in Parliament, amongst NGOs, amongst ourselves, with regard to our location within the Department of Correctional Services, our powers, and so forth. There's in fact currently litigation in the Cape High Court brought by an NGO addressing exactly those questions. The application has been brought by Sonke Gender Justice, and together with the ministry, the department and others, the inspectorate is a party. Now, the call for additional powers to the inspectorate is made, and I think it's a logical call in the light of what some appeared, and in our own view, the lack of coercive powers or stronger powers to deal with some of the things that go wrong in our prisons. IPID is an example. There has been a call, as you correctly say, that our powers should be similar to those of IPID. You raised the question, or the callers had raised the question with regard to what happens to inmates, and he spoke about, I think it's Pindile from, Pindile had spoken about St. Albans, with regard to what happens in a situation where there's a strong prima facie case of officials who are involved in untoward, unlawful violence, whether they are suspended. Of course, they're all entitled to due process. But the question remains whether their continued presence, and I'm not just talking about St. Albans,
while the investigation is going on,
whether their continued presence does not militate against the administration of justice. In other words, are they in a position to influence or not?
Let's take that question squarely.
As a matter of logic,
yes,
that is the case.
Let's take that question,
I'm not too sure in the St. Albans case, the Commissioner might tell us a little more about that. But we have certainly found that the presence of officials who are implicated could, and sometimes do, have a negative effect on the independence of an investigation.
Let's take that question to the National Commissioner. National Commissioner, Pindile raised an issue. I think it has to do with what Mr. Raga is raising now, that you need to deploy the people who work there who are being investigated, because they can't be there when they are being investigated. The other question is what Mr. Raga is raising is similar to what Pindile was raising, but I don't know how feasible is what Pindile raised. But first of all, while you think about that, let's take this call from Gwai from Eastern Cape. Gwai, good afternoon and welcome to Rights and Recourse.
Good afternoon, RNR. Good afternoon, Dumil.
Yes, Mkhaz.
Good afternoon to Miles Law.
Good afternoon, sir.
And I know Zach, the Commissioner.
All of that.
My support for Zach. I've known him for a very long time. I trust the judgment, Kazek. He worked under me. There are unfortunate incidences that have happened with correctional centers to Mzansi Africa. I also trust the regional commissioners as well as the staff sethu. But sometimes things happen that they cannot control. Talking about gangsterism, it's been there for some time and we've tried to combat it as much as we could. The issue of humane treatment, Yamabanjwa, of offenders and prisoners, it's something that we have emphasized for a very long time. and the way that there should be a balance between what's happening in terms of administration and of making sure that in our centers, nothing untoward happens to mess up that balance. And for the 5 years that I've stayed with correctional services, we've tried to manage that. The Judicial Inspectorate has always been there to make sure that and the reports are done properly. So sometimes when people throw stones at a department like correctional services, people should always be worried. W-A-R-Y, and then we are looking after offenders, as in all kinds of things, and I believe in second chances, but we need to do the right thing and correct all the wrongs that have happened.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your input. You see, you are a former correctional services person. You support the National Commission. National Commission, good support there from Mkwai. But answer that question, Mkwai, with a question that was raised by Mr. Ragadan in Cape Town. In 2001, President Thabo Mbeki appointed the Jali Commission to investigate allegations of corruption, maladministration, nepotism, and a plethora of improper conduct by correctional services members. Why do we still have this breakdown in the correctional services?
Mr. Mateza and your viewers, I think what is important here is to understand that we are working with human beings. On this side is your officials, on the other side is offenders. And the treatment that you accord to officials and the treatment that you accord to offenders needs to have, as Mkwai says, a balance. And whenever there's an eruption of violence, our officials have been trained to use force, but not use excessive force. Now, in cases where it is abundantly clear that they had used excessive force, once an investigation has been conducted, action is taken against those officials. In terms of our Labor Relations Act, in terms of our basic conditions of employment, but also importantly, in terms of the Constitution, because we have to abide by the Constitution. Now, whether we should transfer the entire staff of St. Albans out of St. Albans and all the offenders is something that needs to be considered seriously. Indeed, I need a change management at St. Albans. And that's something that I will be looking into come next week. I'm sure by Friday I would have gone to St. Albans to go and have a meeting with the management there, but also with the staff. Because the manner in which we dealt with the violence.
And what about the inmates?
No, I've seen the inmates. I've been to those that have been injured. I've interviewed them myself. But I think what is also critical is to ensure that the entire atmosphere at St. Albans, but in all of our correctional facilities, is conducive to all of the programs that we want to put in place as a department to change these people that have come to us. Now, what is critically important is my officials need also to have that change of mindset, to think like South Africans today and not think like South Africans pre-1994. There are those that are, as we say in our white paper, that we have these challenges where officials have become institutionalized. In other words, they are also now having put on their own blinkers, can't see things in a better way as we want to see them. In the South Africa of today, human rights are important and needs to be respected. However, our situation is critical in the sense that we don't have the facilities like your new Kimberley Tswelopele, like your Mangaung and your Kutamas in Tumule, where we emphasize unit management. We still have a number of these facilities that we inherited from the past, which were basically built to only warehouse people without any training and anything else. And rehabilitation. So this transformation that I spoke about is something that the government of this country and the people of this country needs to ensure that enough resources are given to correctional facilities so that we build better facilities where we would emphasize humane treatment and humane incarceration. I think that's basic. But also to ensure that our criminal justice system functions in a better way. Before we lock up a person, we must have concluded an investigation. Now, the police would say further investigation for 2 years, for 4 years, for 5 years. The correctional services get overcrowded because the influx, people are just coming in and not going out. But also importantly is, what does the judiciary say about this? Because it is important. You can't be...
Here you're talking about, sorry, my apologies, National Commissioner, you're talking about awaiting trial prisoners.
Yes.
Who are waiting to go to court, but the case is always remanded. They are remanded because the case is being postponed because the police say they haven't finalized the investigation.
That's correct. That's what I'm saying. But for me,
there's a whole value chain
there's a whole value chain coming, starting from the police to prosecution, to justice, and to ourselves, where we need to sit together and find solutions. And that is why, when he was referring to former Deputy Minister of Justice, Andries Snell, that investigation and that research that was done, the recommendations are very clear. However, we still have quite a long way to go, because it is not only correctional services. And I think we make the mistake to say correctional services is the culprit here. Indeed, yes, the violence happened in our facility and we have to deal with it. But let's look at the holistic picture of criminal justice system in our country.
Let me get a view from Mr. Golden Miles Budu. Earlier, Mr. Budu, we spoke about gangsterism in jails, and the commissioner, with respect, said they come from outside, and me and you had a discussion during the break where they come from. Just explain to us, what are the different categories of gangsters?
Well, you get the big fives who are most of the time informers of the system. Matuba Sporo. Okay.
Matuba Sporo.
Ja, hulle is van German. Kadze Fall, Stanley die ander ou. Jy sal meet met 25 caterpillars van hier in German. Then you get a 26 who are only dealing with robbing other inmates. When conning them from their belongings doesn't work, then they become violent. Then you get a 28s who are in fact most of the time involved in unnatural sex with the younger offenders, which are juveniles. Then you get the Air Force 3 and Air Force 4. Air Force 3 escape from prison without injuring anybody. Air Force 4 does that because if they get arrested for the crime they've committed whilst they escape, they get rearrested and they hope when they attend the court case they will further escape. But we should have, as a country, dealt with prison gangsterism a long time ago. We should have joined forces and made it clear to these gangsters that, look, you are here to serve a sentence and your responsibility is to do your time. You know, I go and then read a document that was prepared by the Democratic Alliance in 2005, and it became a public document in 2007. It is called Prison Work, Where Prisoners Work. Everything that they have written in this 8-page document, it's some of the things that we submitted in Parliament those days when we
In other words, some prisoners should be allowed to go and work and be paid a commensurate allowance.
This is what the Democratic Alliance says, and they say it after they have
We'll come back to that. We'll come back to that. So that's something I wanted to come to, but I want to go back to Cape Town, to Mr. Raga. Mr. Raga, overcrowding is one of the biggest challenges facing the South African correctional system. As far back as March 2011, there were 18 correctional facilities that were critically overcrowded by over 200%. Something a former judge inspecting judge Dion van Zyl says was shockingly inhumane. We are informed that this is still the case. And we heard what the National Commissioner said, what causes this cramped situation in our prisons.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Mateza. The overcrowding problem has been with us for a long time, and it appears that it's going to be with us for a long time. We have a very high crime rate. We have a criminal justice system that works as efficiently as it can. We have a Chief Justice that has established norms and standards for courts working more quickly. But let me address overcrowding. In fact, I think it's instructive to talk about overcrowding in respect of those who are on remand and those who are sentenced. Let's talk about remand detainees. The Department of Correctional Services now, after a long debate as to where that category of inmate belonged, has accepted a political decision had been made that they belong and they're not going anywhere but within the Department of Correctional Services. Progressive legislation had been enacted and put into operation that pertained particularly to those on remand. Now, if we break up some of the solutions and where they need to be found of that category of remand, let's look at the criminal justice system. Yes, absolutely. The role of the South African Police Services, the role of prosecutors and the courts. There's another aspect to it, of course, that the Department of Correctional Services has quite a few laws, an opportunity to reduce the overcrowding situation by bringing applications in terms of the Criminal Procedure Act. There's a provision called Section 63 capital A, which allows a head of center where conditions are becoming intolerable to bring an application to a court. There's another section called Section 62F, which allows a court to release someone on remand in lieu of paying bail, but to be monitored by a correctional official. And then
can we just speed up? Can we just speed up because we're running out of time.
That has been recently enacted. The department is now obliged to highlight to the South African Police Services and ultimately to the courts those inmates who are being held in excess of 2 years. I think so. When we talk about overcrowding and remand, it is true that the Department of Correctional Services, by and large, receives a warrant issued by a court and has to receive the inmate and hold him or her until the finalization of the trial.
Let's keep it there. Let's keep it there, Mr. Raga. Let's keep it there. The other question I wanted to ask before we finalize this discussion, National Commissioner, is the fact that the recommendations of the inspecting judge are not necessarily binding. Apparently, the recommendations of the Judicial Inspectorate are not binding, and if the Department of Correctional Services refuses to implement them, there is nothing the Office of the Inspecting Judge can do to enforce them. Is that true?
No, that is not true, Mr. Mateza. What normally happens is the Office of the Inspecting Judge, on a quarterly basis, submits to the Department of Correctional Services reports of incarceration methods, of assaults and so forth, unnatural deaths. And the department is obliged to respond by having done an investigation and also providing information as to the conclusion of those investigations. Firstly, that were done by the inspectorate, but also by ourselves. And if there is any evidence that criminality has taken place that the inspecting judge is reporting to us, those cases are reported to the South African Police Services, and the criminal case is being opened. What I think is being referred to here is that the Judicial Inspectorate must, like IPID, cause that people are prosecuted themselves. And that is what was being referred to, that they seem not to be having enough teeth. And I think what is important is it's a legislation matter. And myself and the management of correctional services today, with the inspecting judge, have committed ourselves to ensure that that amendment to the legislation is being done in this current financial year, so that the parliament must decide itself whether it is going to be as independent as IPID or it will still be resorting under correctional services. I think that's our
final word from you, Mr. Pudu.
Here is an organization that has been around for a very long time. Maybe the commissioner must also make a recommendation that a legislation must be enacted that will watchdog the watchdog. In other words, the South African Prisoners Organization for Human Rights, that has been around for quite some time, play an oversight role on the Correctional Services Judicial Inspectorate. In other words, we make sure as an organization that is outside of the system that both the Judicial Inspectorate and Corrections does what the book says, including the Department of Correctional Services. Or else we will have a situation where the Judicial Inspectorate and the Department of Correctional Services, because they are birds of the same feathers, would keep on doing what has been done all along, you know?
Mr. Budu, thank you very much. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. This has been a riveting discussion, but unfortunately we didn't cover all the bases. Next time we'll get another opportunity to discuss some of the issues I wanted to discuss. For instance, I wanted to refer to the Bradley McCallum case, which I have not referred to. I, once again, in closing, wants to go back to Lucas Munting, who says, the South African prison system has faced many challenges for many years, some as a result of external influences, other of its own making. There is a reason to believe that progress is being made, and that the situation is improving. But the gains made need to be carefully protected and not inadvertently undone by decisions resulting from reviews that have not been thought through. The greatest risk that the review process holds for the prison system is to marginalize it from the rest of the criminal justice system. The prison system is an integral part of the criminal justice system and a dumping ground, and not a dumping ground at the end of which only the Department of Correctional Services becomes responsible. This has been Rights and Recourse. This program is repeated on Wednesday morning at 5 o'clock. The views expressed in the show do not necessarily reflect those of the SABC or Rights and Recourse. This program is repeated at 5, as I already said, on Wednesday morning. You can also find us on YouTube and on Twitter. Continue to tweet. From all of us here in the studio, thank you to our guests and good afternoon.
I proceed